Retirement was supposed to be a serene chapter in Justice Elijah Grant's life. After decades of serving as a judge in a bustling city, he cherished the peace that came with his new home, a charming house nestled in a quiet neighborhood. The place boasted a beautiful backyard, complete with a glistening swimming pool that sparkled under the sun. Here, he could host gatherings with friends or simply unwind with a good book, listening to the soothing sounds of nature. Yet, the tranquility was short-lived. Not long after moving in, he became painfully aware of his neighbor, Julia, a woman whose presence seemed to radiate negativity. She had been a constant thorn in his side since the first day he moved in. With her loud complaints and overtly racist comments directed at him, he quickly learned that Julia was notorious for being the resident Karen. Though she was white and he was a black man, he believed that their differences shouldn't matter. He had earned respect through integrity and fairness during his years on the bench, but to Julia, he was just a barrier to her desire for control over her surroundings. Julia had a pool of her own, but it was always too cold or too dirty in her eyes. One hot summer afternoon, she climbed over the fence, crossed the property line, and plopped herself in Elijah's pristine pool without an invitation. Furious, he confronted her, but she brushed him off dismissively, insisting that he was being unreasonable. She clutched his words like ammunition, twisting his assertiveness into a narrative that made him look like the aggressor, the very stereotype that he had spent his entire life fighting against. Their encounters soon became a regular part of Elijah's life, as Julia continuously disregarded boundaries. Despite his best attempts to resolve the situation peacefully, each conversation ended in ego-driven hostility, leaving him frustrated and eager for a solution that didn't involve more confrontation. How could she be so oblivious to her invasive behavior? And more importantly, why was she allowed to behave this way? Elijah decided to take a stand. A seasoned judge, he understood the law and had always believed in justice. Julia thought she could manipulate the situation, but he had the will to ensure her actions had consequences. He called a few friends at the local police department, a network built during his years on the bench. They agreed to keep an eye on the neighborhood and warned Elijah about Julia's penchant for stirring up trouble. One afternoon, as he was tending to his garden, he saw Julia once again setting foot on his property, eyeing the pool like it was her rightful kingdom. This time, however, something snapped in him. The combination of indignation and frustration sparked an idea that sent a thrill down his spine. He recalled a science experiment from his younger days, an old concoction that could change states based on temperature. Elijah figured if he modified the fluid, he could create a sticky solution that would coat the surface of the pool. The next day, while Julia was away, he meticulously prepared the fluid with a combination of sticky substances that would harden upon contact with her skin. After testing its effectiveness, he poured it into the pool, ensuring it remained undetectable among the shimmering blue waters. The day after his secret mission, Julia returned, swooping down with her usual arrogance. With her sunglasses perched atop her head, she strutted confidently to his backyard, officially crossing the boundary again. This time, as she slid into the pool, a wave of satisfaction washed over Elijah. Her laughter quickly turned to confusion and then distress as she found herself trapped in a sticky embrace. As Julia flailed in the water, struggling to swim, she let out a high-pitched scream, demanding that he remove her immediately. Witnessing her struggle from the safety of his porch, Elijah felt a complex mixture of empathy and justice. He considered the countless times he had encountered racially motivated harassment and negativity through his career. A part of him thought that perhaps the universe was finally balancing the scales. When Julia reached for her phone to call the police, he knew he had to intervene before she caused more trouble. A little earlier, one of his police officer friends had assured him that if Julia called, they would handle it privately, as they knew the context of her history of harassment. When the police arrived, they found Julia struggling to pull herself out of the pool, covered in the sticky fluid. Elijah approached the officers, offering them a keen perspective of the ongoing issue with Julia. "I'm sorry you had to see this spectacle," he said, gesturing toward her. "But I've tried every peaceful route possible." The police, having heard his side of the story before, nodded sympathetically. Julia, flustered and embarrassed, attempted to spin her narrative. She claimed that Elijah was deliberately trying to harm her, and that she was merely trying to enjoy a hot day. But it was clear to the officers that this was a continuation of her disrespectful behavior. Julia was furious, the bubbling rage boiling over. A flood of indignation filled her as she demanded to be taken seriously. "I know my rights," she shouted, her voice echoing in the still of the afternoon. "You can't treat me this way." Elijah stood firm, feeling a sense of empowerment he hadn't experienced in some time. "And I'm here to remind you of mine," he said, maintaining his composure. The officers glanced at each other, clearly unimpressed by her antics. Elijah's words, forthright and rooted in his experience as a judge, spoke volumes compared to her frantic and erratic behavior. Eventually, Julia was forced to leave with the officers, her pride diminished and her complaints falling on deaf ears. As she retreated, Jimmy, a seasoned officer, leaned over to Elijah and said, "Don't worry, Judge. We'll keep an eye on her. This neighborhood needs people who respect each other." Back at home, feeling a rush of adrenaline, Elijah decided he wouldn't let this end here. Perhaps it was time to take a stand against other neighbors who secretly shared Julia's sentiments, the ones who supported her toxic behavior. With a sense of purpose, he decided to form a community meeting to discuss neighborhood values and respect. On the flyer, he added, "Racism has no place here." Word spread quickly in the neighborhood about the meeting. Elijah's determination to bring the community together sparked interest and apprehension alike. He was pleasantly surprised to see both people from diverse backgrounds and long-standing residents who were genuinely interested in fostering a sense of belonging. On the day of the gathering, the atmosphere was electric. Elijah opened the floor, discussing the importance of mutual respect and the strength found in diversity. As the talks progressed, residents shared their experiences, some from the past and some that mirrored the recent tensions with Julia. Stories of simple negligence born from prejudice flowed like a river, drenching the room in raw honesty. A middle-aged neighbor named Thomas stood up to express how he had witnessed Julia's behavior many times, often siding with her in wrongly condemning Elijah. "I was blind," he said. "I justified my ignorance because I didn't want to confront my reality. I see that now. We need to stand up." As the exchange deepened, the atmosphere shifted. A strong sense of community emerged from the ashes of ignorance and bigotry. Elijah encouraged everyone to discuss the steps they could take to foster inclusion, creating a united front that actively opposed racism. Julia, having heard about the meeting, tried to provoke Elijah afterward, believing she could undermine his efforts. She swung by with a group of her supporters, seeking validation, but the tide had turned. Instead of finding companionship, she was confronted with a coalition of neighbors willing to reject her existence as an outlier in their community. As rumors circulated about Julia's unfurling reputation, her behavior was called into question by others who had once supported her. They began to see her for who she truly was, and the whispers grew louder. Elijah remained steadfast, knowing justice was not merely about punishment but cultivating a greater understanding and changing hearts. Julia soon found herself ostracized, her influence waning as the community embraced empathy and respect, leaving her isolated. It was only a matter of time before she faced the consequences of her actions on a broader scale. Her tiresome complaints fell on deaf ears, and she was reported for her troubling behavior in the neighborhood. The police stepped in once again, reiterating the necessity for her to respect boundaries and laws. With public sentiment shifting against her, she was left with no allies, no supporters. As Elijah watched from his porch, the echoes of change resonated in their community, new alliances forged in justice against an age-old foe. Elijah realized that sometimes taking a stand meant stepping outside the confines of societal norms. In creating the conversations that needed to be had, he had allowed the community to reclaim their space, inspiring a wave of racial justice that seemed to ripple far beyond the neighborhood and into their lives. In the end, Elijah not only triumphed over Julia but also paved the way for a legacy of justice, understanding, and strength against prejudice, a living testament to the power of community when illuminated against the shadows of discrimination.